99% of the people we prosecute are truly actually guilty of the crime for which they're prosecuted. The purpose of sentencing is to punish, to deter, to incapacitate, and yes, to rehabilitate.
No, but it's so important. Listen, you spend most of your time, even up there, talking about punishing people and deterring people, incapacitating people. We can do a better job, and we should do a better job on rehabilitation.
If we pass this legislation, we'll be paying more and getting less than we currently have. How does that make sense?
I want you to meet Louis.
My name is Louis.
Federal or state?
Federal.
Federal?
Yes.
Let me see your pre-sentence report. Let me see your pre-sentence report, then you and I can have a meaningful conversation, because so many people talk about their circumstances, and
you haven't even listened to them.
I know, but
you can't just throw somebody in a category and not listen. It's not fair.
You as a journalist need to see his pre-sentence report.
And you as a human being need to listen to a human being. Are you a father?
I am far much more than something that has been written about me. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a licensed clinician in the state of Connecticut. I have a master's degree in clinical counseling. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and I also have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, all of which I earned while I was incarcerated. Now, however...
Isn't that a terrific thing? In the federal system, you learned all those things?
However...
Is that right?
Yes, but here's the caveat. I did not earn those things by way of the institution subsidizing my education. I learned those things, and I had the great fortune of being educated and matriculating through university because I was subsidized by my family and friends, and I shouldn't be exceptionalized. I take these conversations back to the people who are on the inside, and I tell them that there are people who don't want you to come home.
Let's stay together.
Yeah. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to My Harlem Portrait, the show that wants to shed a light on the fundamental contribution of African Americans to the building of this country. We are doing a series of interviews with filmmakers, talents, producers who are participating with their films to the Tribeca Film Festival 2021, the 20th anniversary of Tribeca. And today we have with us Brandon Kramer, film director, and Louis Reed, the activist that participated in this movie. The movie follows and features Van Jones, who we all know is a very well-known political commentator, journalist, lawyer, activist. And this is about a very important event, and the movie is called The First Step. Thank you for being with us, and welcome to My Harlem Portrait.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You start the movie by saying Van Jones navigates political minefield of criminal justice reform in The First Step. This is how the movie is presented. So to you, Brandon, introduce yourself a little bit, what you've done, and with your strategic and focus opening of the first scenes, when I watched it, you expressed the essence of the whole controversy. I think it was really genius what you did, because in 3 minutes, I understood the whole problematic. So can you tell our viewers how your movie starts and why you choose this subject?
Yeah, so I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. And, you know, I'm an independent filmmaker. This is an independent film. And, you know, very briefly, just I try to tell stories about social leaders, social movements from a very intimate perspective, trying to follow moments of real advocacy and change as it's unfolding, so that audiences can understand the complexities involved in, you know, trying to make a change happen in this country. And so Van and Louis and people in this film were advocates that I felt were attempting to do something that was nearly impossible and was perilous. And I felt like that story needed to be told and documented. So The movie opens with, I don't want to give too much away, but since it's the opening, the movie opens with, sort of opens at the end of the film, actually. We return to it, and it's Van and Lewis both going to CPAC, which is one of the largest conservative conference in the country. And Van was there to advocate for criminal justice reform, to speak about the successes of working across the aisle on the First Step Act. And we wanted to start the film there because, it's a film about reaching across the aisle. It's a film about engaging across these political divides. And in that moment, Van being there, it just sort of beautifully set up both the opportunity that he saw and was working toward, and also the strife of that. He's approached by conservatives at the conference, for being a socialist, for his comments on the air at the 2016 election around white lash. And so it sort of set up the divide that he's working within.
And you done it in a fantastic way, because you really, at a certain point, they ask him, what are you doing here? And at the end of the movie, we see what he was doing there. So I think that was fantastic. He said something revealing just after that, Van Jones. He said, they have the president, they have the Congress, the Supreme Court. You can just sit and let the GOP get worse and worse, or you can find a better strategy. And that, I think, gives us the idea, the reason why he has been going through so much, because during the movie we see how much backlashes he received from left and right, and how much pain, his personal pain, physical pain he went through, and mental pain he went through to get this thing done. So Louis, Van Jones called you an organizing genius. He said you have charisma, and he said that when you came out of jail, you put together a grassroots of inmates and you created a movement. Van Jones is the co-founder with Jessica Jackson of CAT 50. Tell me what this organization is about, and you work in that organization.
Yeah, so well, again, thanks for having me on. And I always like to say that I'm an amalgam of people that I have been around. When I was incarcerated, I never met an inmate. I never met an ex-con. I never met a prisoner. But who I was incarcerated with mothers, with fathers, with sons, with daughters, with loved ones, people who were actually loved by somebody else. Even if they happened to be rejected by society, they were accepted by the love that their family members had for them. And so every time I walked the halls of power, I carried those people with me. I served nearly 14 years in federal prison. And when I was incarcerated, one of the things that just kept being replete in my mind was how I saw too many Black, brown, and poor white people being either excessively prosecuted or disproportionately sentenced. And that lit a righteous indignation in me. And so when I had the opportunity to come along to work on essentially what was the impossible bill through the First Step Act, and through the visionary leadership of Van Jones, and also through the legal brilliance of Jessica Jackson, I thought that it was a moment that I wanted to be a part of, so that we can in turn make a movement. What is that movement? That movement is to ultimately get the entire country to reimagine, what does criminal justice reform look like? If we can walk into a Trump White House, who initially ran on crime and carnage, he was trying to resurrect Willie Horton. The entire Republican Party just did not seem to be a spouse to criminal justice reform. And slowly but surely, through people such as Tribeca K. Sam, who was the dignity director for CUT 50, people such as David Safavian, who is our very good friend over at the American Conservative Union, through Pat Nolan, through Brett Tolman, and in the entire coalition of people on the left and the right through those individuals, people who have been impacted by the issue, we were able to slowly but surely turn not just the heart of President Trump, but ultimately we were able to turn the minds of the people in Congress. And that is what accumulated, and that is the final result of the First Step Act. And I am extremely, extremely, extremely proud to have been a part of that coalition.
And this is, your organization has really as a core to focus on bipartisan criminal justice reform, because as we have seen, it is impossible to have a bill like that passed if there isn't a bipartisan support. That's important.
Well, look, you know, Republicans at their best, they believe in liberty. Democrats at their best, they believe in justice. And all of us as Americans at our best should believe in liberty and justice for all. So this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. This is an American issue. This is an American issue. Right. And it's an American issue that happens, it just so happens to disproportionately impact her citizens where they are of color.
The beginning of a movie, Brandon, there is this interview that Van Jones does with the Breakfast Club, where he says something very important. He says, it's not enough just to be anti-Trump. We must be for our community and our solution. We must be strategic. And here comes in the fact of the opioid crisis that has accelerated and given the push to the white conservatives and to the GOP to support a criminal justice reform. Tell us why.
Yeah, I think Van is somebody, and Lewis and Jessica and the whole, the whole team were a group of leaders, or are a group of leaders that see in a moment of crisis where there's opportunity and where there are openings. And I think, what Van, Lewis can probably speak more closely to it, but my experience with it was, what Van is saying there is that, yes, it's important to fight, to resist, to oppose all the terrible things that this administration is doing. But it's also important to look for where are the opportunities for common ground. I think the addiction crisis, I think Van, as you hear in the film, and as you hear from the activists who have been fighting this fight on the front lines of South Central Los Angeles for decades, this is an issue that has been affecting communities there in Los Angeles, and communities of color for generations. And Van saw an opportunity, as other leaders have. Van's not the only one, to forge a union, to bring people together around their shared pain dealing with this trauma. And so, yeah, one of the core parts of the film, there's the political story, which we were talking about earlier, about the First Step Act, working on this bipartisan bill. And then the human story, one of the human stories of the film is really Van takes a group of activists from Los Angeles, brings them to West Virginia, and they sit down and share their common pain, their experience around loss, losing family members, losing children to addiction. And they also have the hard conversation. There's moments. There's moments of connecting, and then some of the most beautiful moments are when they're just intimate in a car. And Tylo James, one of the organizers, shares about, very honestly to one of the advocates from West Virginia, this is what it means to me when someone like you votes for Trump. This is what it means to me, and he shares why he voted for, this person. And so that kind of raw exchange around both shared pain and connection, and also differences, I think never is shown in the media. And so our film was really attempting to humanize and really open up these lines of dialogue, and capture, Van and his team's work bringing these people together.
Which is fundamental, because you really showed the whole development of the story. And if people watch this movie, when they watch this movie, they will understand how important it has been to get through all this, to get to the point where we got. and have the bill approved. I would like.
Maria, I just wanted to jump in though. I really, I think that I don't think that people will have a full understanding because there's only so much that you can capture in a very short period of time. And I think that the Kramer brothers, and all of their genius and all of their creativity, they try to do as best as possible. But there was literally blood, sweat, and tears that went into trying to get that bill across the finish line. I mean, when you think about how seismic the impact is, more than 17,000 people, 17,000, not 17, not 1,700, right? This is 17,000 people were released from federal prison as a result of what, I think that there was some pundit who called us a motley crew as a result of a motley crew of folks coming together and just refusing to die, refusing not to believe in the unbelievable. I think that when the audience walks away from watching this film, I think that you get a microcosm of a perspective of what it is in order to put in what it is that we put in order to lift the issue, amplify the issue around opioids, and amplify the issue around mass incarceration. But it really just scratches the surface. Hence the reason why we're having this conversation today, to actually build that out.
It is important because this is not new. The fact that the conservative get interested in a plight, in a problem that has touched Black communities only, it's only when it starts touching white communities also. It has happened with the crack epidemic and so on, and now it's happening again. So it is important that to have someone like Van that managed to put together people like you and all the coalition that he put together to make people understand we need to work with them to use that the fact that they are now inclined to accept something that they wouldn't have accepted a little time ago. We need to use that now to have an advantage for our people, for all the people that are being incarcerated and have, we know that the Black population, the Black and brown population gets much higher sentences for the same kind of crime and misdemeanor than the white population. So this is a disparity that needs to be talked about and decreased and annulled. So this movie, I think you understand, at least I understood much more than what you think we do, because it really, Brandon was amazing in making understand the pain you guys went through, the internal fight with, should I really deal with these people who have such a different moral core, different from me? But do I have the right not to talk to them and not to deal with them just because I don't like them, just because we don't have the same values? I should work for my people. This is what comes out.
And I think I'll just say, I mean, Louis, I'm sure you've got a lot to say about that, but for me, I felt like Cut 50, Van, the whole team, the whole effort behind the First Step Act, it was being, and especially around Van, I felt like he was being really radically misunderstood by the media. There was all this vitriol and hate and criticism. Some of the criticism on the bill was legitimate, it's like and important, and I think that we focused on that and tried to lift that up. But what you're describing, there was a really deeply thought out strategy. There was a really deeply sense of a goal and a purpose that happened here, and that was often glossed over, minimized, reduced in what I felt was really harmful ways. And so the goal behind the film is to really dive into that strategy, try to unearth it as much as we could, and lift up both the impact of it and some of the consequences of it.
And I think another side that you showed, which is very important, is how honest Van Jones is in what he's doing. And in partially, you also showed it by showing him in 1993, Yale, his graduation. Tell us what happened.
Oh, his Yale graduation?
Yeah, when he put on the Malcolm X t-shirt for the graduation and he kept his dreadlocks, and his mother comment was, he would not cut his dreadlocks because he would feel like a sellout if he had done so. I think that shows you from the very beginning, from when he was a young guy, that he has a strategy, he knows what he wants, and he has morals and total honesty in what he does.
Yeah, I
Lewis,
gotta. Yeah, I just want. I want to touch on something. You know, Brandon talked about like the misunderstanding from the media, but I think that what was especially, you know, from my perspective, what I was able to see that was extremely hurtful was the misunderstanding from the culture, from the very people by whom you are attempting to help. You know, by the very people that you come from, who is a reflection of you, who you are having conversations with day in and night out, who you know behind the scenes they want their loved one released from prison, and the culture at large had a great degree of suspicion, not because the strategy, not because the execution was off, but they misunderstood the strategy, because there was Trump in the mix. And I think that anytime you have someone who was as controversial, as vitriol, as a lightning rod for whatever fill in a blank, anyone who's remotely connected with him or her, you are going to have a great degree of suspicion. And so I think that the film, what it does is it definitely, I think that it definitely answers some questions that very well may have been suspended in some people's minds.
Yes. And thank you for that, because you also showed that, you showed all the criticism that came from Black Lives Matter leaders, from people he knew, from even at a certain point, Hakeem Jeffries, who in the beginning, he was supporting the bill. He wasn't so happy when he realized that the sentences, reduction of sentences and so on, wasn't included in the bill. But then in the end, they all agreed and they all came together. So tell us about this passage that he went through, with Trump first saying yes, he would accept it when he talked to Jared Kushner, and then he said no. I mean, it was a real roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think you might be talking about Senator Cory Booker,
Yes.
not Hakeem Jeffries.
Hakeem Jeffries also at a certain point, both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lewis is probably much better equipped than I am to sort of give the narrative sort of arc of what happened in the bill. And like Lewis is saying, a documentary, you got 85 minutes to capture a very complex intersection. But
You did it fantastic.
Thank you. And it took 2 years to we filmed almost 350 hours of footage over the course of 3 years. It took 2 years to edit this film because it really is an incredibly complicated story. There's lots of amazing people, like Lewis was mentioning, that worked on this bill that were left out. People from LA and West Virginia that we couldn't highlight as well. But the one thing I will say, just to your point about highlighting the critics in the film, people on the left and the right who opposed the bill, that was really important to us from the get-go, is that, and to Van, and to Lewis. I think like everyone, like Lewis, you and I had conversations, about how do we connect with the ACLU? How do we connect with Cory Booker? How do we make sure that the strategy that was standing in opposition to the bill initially was really, elevated and there, so that the film can exist in a space to have a conversation, no matter what your politics are, around what worked here, what are some of the challenges. So that was a really important ethic of the filmmaking. And I give Van, Lewis, Jessica a lot of credit, because it is not easy to open your lives at such a difficult moment where you're doing something that is deeply unpopular in certain circles, very controversial, they opened their lives to a documentary film crew, and they let us capture the highs, when the bill passed, but also the lows when they were really down, when the world was against them. And so that takes a lot of courage, especially Van, who is a public figure, to allow us into that space.
And which is a very lonely, it feels like a very lonely place to be in. It feels like you're in an echo chamber sometime. Look, I know that me personally, Van felt like he was in a lonely space, but you have to consider that the folks who were connected with Van, sometimes when you are in the public domain, you can retreat behind celebrity friends. You can find solace in other folks and do other things, but the folks who is not necessarily standing as light of as bright of a light as Van, the people like myself, the people like Jessica, the people like Tribeca K. Sam, the people like Sarita Steib Martin, the people like David Safavian, and so on and so forth. Those of us, it was a crummy place to feel like you were in, because there was no place. I mean, you're getting hit from both sides. Your family is trying to ask you, hey, what are you doing connected with this guy who's connected with the guy, on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm sorry, Black Lives Matter Parkway in Washington, D.C. What are you doing connecting with these folks who, on one issue over here that probably has nothing to do with criminal justice reform, they seem to be terrible. But on this issue, there's a degree of suspicion. That's a lonely, very, very lonely place to be in. And I think that ultimately, when that bill got passed, there was a sense of vindication that you saw in our tears, that you saw in our jubilation, that you saw in our celebration. There was just vindication in that, because we knew all along. We knew all along that this was the right thing to do. And so I can't give the Kramer brothers enough public praise for how they have framed this documentary. And again, they shot hundreds of hours of film, and unfortunately, the people who were who added value to getting this bill passed, they weren't able to be captured as much, but we carry these individuals into the conversations as such. And look, Maria, I appreciate you. I have to hop, but I know that Brandon is going to continue to take the conversation just a little bit further.
Finishing in 2 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Can I say one thing about Lewis real quick? Just before you hop, Lewis, I just want to say, there's a scene in the film that, for anybody that watches the documentary, where Lewis has to, face shoulder to shoulder, eye to eyeball, a leader on the conservative right who was vehemently opposed to this bill, and quite frankly, talks to Lewis, treats Lewis in an incredibly dehumanizing way. And if you were going to speak to that, that's great. But I just want to say, like, that moment sums up the courage that it took to walk across this aisle, Lewis. You were unafraid to have those hard conversations that so many people are not having. So just want to give you a huge amount of credit for not just the passage of the bill, but just being a leader in the movement that is willing to have those tough conversations.
That is absolutely right. Thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation. We are at the end already. So thank you for being with us. I just wanted you to say where people, our viewers, can see your movie so that you promote it.
Yeah, the film just premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival last week, and it will be streaming and have an in-person premiere at AFI Docs in Silver Spring, Maryland, the AFI Silver Theater on Wednesday, June 23rd at 5 p.m. So you can see it in person if you're in the DC area, or you can stream it online by going on the AFI Docs Film Festival website. And really appreciate you having us here. And good luck for having this movie played on TV, in movie theaters and so on, because it's fantastic. And maybe with all the material you have, you can make a mini series of it. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.